What is up? What is up, YouTube? How y'all doing? Check it out without a doubt. Let's see what this bad boy is all about. Hey, Trump mental stability concerns growing. Two National Guard members shot in D.C. and today's news. Y'all hit that subscribe button, hit that bell, man. They gave me this video to do real quick. And he's getting demonized. He's getting dementia. That's what that is, dementia. I had to
So it's gonna try to have a light.
I had to sound it out. I'm mad because she done turned the heat on, y'all. It's hot. I done put on a hoodie. I wanted to look real cool and gangster for y'all. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Let's see what this is. Let's
so it's
check
gonna
it
try
out.
to have a light and friendly, hey, welcome to the Philip DeFranco show. There's no show tomorrow. Happy Thanksgiving. But now, horrifyingly, we're getting the breaking news that 2 members of the National Guard were shot near the White House. With this being breaking news, there's some conflicting reporting right now. Earlier, you had the governor of West Virginia saying that the troops were from the state's National Guard and that they were dead. But then he also followed that up saying we are now receiving conflicting reports about the condition of our 2 Guard members and will provide additional updates once we receive more complete information. And so right now, there's a lot of back and forth reporting here. And with that in mind, you had local police saying one suspect who has reportedly been shot as well is in custody, and the AP saying that this individual's injuries appear not to be life-threatening. Also, as far as the shooter, you had Trump calling them an animal and saying that they will pay a steep price, and adding, God bless our great National Guard and all our military and law enforcement. These are truly great people. Right, and with this happening where it did, you had the White House being put under red alert, signifying a potential threat to life, but that has been downgraded to just a high-risk alert. Also, you now have DC police saying that the scene has been secured, and now as we wait for more information, the broader context here is that you also still have more than 2,000 National Guard troops deployed throughout Washington, D.C. And it was actually only just last week that you had a judge ruling that this deployment was illegal and the order blocking it set to go into effect on December 11th. Right? And so with all this, one of the things we're already seeing is that it's being politicized by people on the right, blaming Democrats for speaking out against National Guard deployments in American cities. And with that, you had some specifically calling out the lawmakers who made a video telling troops that they're allowed to reject illegal orders. But that also is you have many noting that their accusations, they come as we really don't know all that much. And at least as of recording, there is no official evidence right now that this was the motive behind it. And so this is something we're definitely going to have our eyes on, but for now, we'll have to wait to see what happens from here. And of course, in the meantime, thoughts, prayers, well wishes to the servicemen and their families. But then next up today, let's talk about Donald Trump's mental fitness. Right, in part because the New York Times called Trump mentally fatigued, and so Trump called one of their reporters ugly. But that was the apparent tit for tat started by an article that the paper published yesterday titled Shorter Days, Signs of Fatigue, Trump Faces Realities of Aging in Office. The piece was written by Katie Rogers and Dylan Friedman, and it said, with headline-grabbing posts on social media, combative interactions with reporters, and speeches full of partisan red meat, Mr. Trump can project round-the-clock energy, virility, and physical stamina. But then adding, the reality is more complicated. Mr. Trump, 79, is the oldest person to be elected to the presidency, and he is aging. With the men analyzing his schedule, noting that he has fewer public events than he did in his first term. Right, also noting that he has a shorter public working window, with most appearances only occurring between noon and 5 p.m. And it also said, when he is in public, occasionally his battery shows signs of wear. During an Oval Office event, Trump sat behind his desk for about 20 minutes as executives standing around him talked about weight loss drugs. At one point, Mr. Trump's eyelids drooped until his eyes were almost closed, and he appeared to doze on and off for several seconds. It then also detailed other instances where his age showed, like when he said that he got an MRI and he didn't even know what was being analyzed. They also pointed to more general trends like his meandering speeches and newfound obsession with the afterlife, as well as just general concerns about his health. And as far as Trump, he wasn't a fan of the article. And so in order to combat a report laying out concerns about his mental state, he then went on a nearly 300-word Truth Social rant insulting the journalists behind it, saying the creeps at the failing New York Times are at it again. He then repeated his talking points claiming he's solving wars and saving the economy, and then he added, to do this requires a lot of work and energy, and I have never worked so hard in my life. Yet despite all of this, the radical left lunatics in the soon-to-fold New York Times did a hit piece on me that I am perhaps losing my energy, despite facts that show the exact opposite. They know this is wrong, as is almost everything they write about me. This cheap rag is truly an enemy of the people. The writer of the story, Katie Rogers, who is assigned to write only bad things about me, is a third-rate reporter who is ugly, both inside and out. There will be a day when I run low on energy. It happens to everyone, but with a perfect physical physical exam and a comprehensive cognitive test that was ace just recently taken. It certainly is not now. And this rant then took off with tons of people going, what the hell? Also, you had a group of people kind of outraged that he called the reporter ugly, right? Noting that it comes not long after he already called a female reporter a piggy just for asking a question about Epstein. And so because of that, and for other reasons, you had tons of people defending Katie Rogers, including the New York Times itself, with a spokesperson releasing a statement saying, "The Times reporting is accurate and built on first-hand reporting of the facts. Name-calling and personal insults don't change that, nor will our journalists hesitate to cover this administration in the face of intimidation tactics like this." Right? And again, this isn't just some outlier situation. This is happening as Trump's mental state has been a major talking point pretty much everywhere. I mean, after Trump accused a group of lawmakers of sedition and said that they could be subject to the death penalty, you had people like AOC saying,
"The president's remarks I think, indicate a level of instability. It's not just shocking, it's not just offensive, it's bizarre, it is erratic, it's volatile, and I think it indicates a mental state that we should all be questioning right now, whether that's emotional, mental, what have you."
And then earlier this month, you had Trump's niece, Mary Trump, who's a clinical psychologist, comparing Trump to his father who had Alzheimer's.
There are times I look at him and I see my grandfather. I see that same look of confusion. I see that he does not always seem to be oriented to time and place. His short-term memory seems to be deteriorating.
You know, well, obviously she's not actually diagnosing him with anything, nor has a doctor officially diagnosed him with this kind of decline. She is far from the first person to speculate. But I mean, one of Gavin Newsom's primary attacks on Trump is his mental fitness. He even recently suggested that Trump has dementia and previously said he's incapable of even a train of thought. You know, this is a conversation that has left political circles. But I mean, you're even seeing it pop up on things like Shane Gillis's podcast.
Do you think he's getting dementia?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think he just seems a little slower than usual, but he's definitely not. He's not at Pine Brains yet.
No, not yet.
But he's circling the drink.
Yeah, because
Quiet Piggy was crazy.
Also, general polling showing growing concerns about Trump's age, with 49% of Americans thinking that he's just too old to be president, which is up from 43% when he first took office. And so we wait to see how things continue, or depending on how you look at it, decline. I really would love to know your thoughts, opinions, and reactions to what we're seeing here. But then next up today, we've got to talk about how a Campbell's exec allegedly went on a completely unhinged tirade about poor people, 3D printed meat, and Indian employees, especially because apparently the guy who recorded it says he was fired for reporting it. So the employee in question is a man by the name of Robert Garza, who has worked as a cybersecurity analyst for the company. And Garza says that this recording was from a meeting that he had at a restaurant last November with Martin Bali. Right, and Bali is a vice president and chief information security officer at Campbell. And specifically, Garza claims that he was expecting to just discuss his salary in this meeting with Bali, but instead, the executive launches into a lengthy rant that Garza secretly recorded. And in this hour-long recording, which Garza's lawyer sent to numerous outlets, the speaker, who Garza says is Bali, can be heard making a number of problematic comments about Campbell's products and customers.
If you look at our pantry, we have for poor people, right? We have that's for poor people. Who buys our? I don't buy Campbell's products barely anymore. It's so healthy. Now that I know what the in it, even in a can of soup, I look at it. Look at me, bioengineered meat. I don't want to eat a piece of chicken that came from a 3D printer.
Then also beyond that, another standout from the lengthy rant were these comments about Indian employees.
They couldn't think for the oven, dumb.
Right, and those were just two of the most controversial comments from the recording, which were also outlined in the lawsuit. As you've got the court filings also alleging that Bali said that he often came to work high on weed edibles. But, you know, really the meat, and pun intended there, of Garza's lawsuit, it centers around what happened after those alleged comments. Because Garza claims that he brought his concerns about Bali to his manager, who is also a defendant in this lawsuit, but the higher-up didn't encourage him to report the incident to HR or tell him how he should proceed. And then, according to the complaint, 2 weeks later, Garza was abruptly terminated, with a lawsuit alleging that he was fired in retaliation for reporting the matter to his boss and accusing the company of fostering a racially hostile environment. And you also had Garza's lawyer telling reporters that his client's termination was especially shocking because Bali had praised his work during this meeting, and he claimed that he had never faced any disciplinary action or write-ups for work performance. Now, with all that said, as far as how Campbell's has responded, the company issued a series of statements, saying in one, it has not been able to verify the validity of the recording and has not been provided with a copy either. But they then also said in a separate press release that if the comments were indeed made by Bali, they are unacceptable, and added, such language does not reflect our values and the culture of our company. We do not tolerate that kind of language under any circumstances. And then noting that Bali's been temporarily placed on leave while they investigate this. Also, beyond that, Campbell's has fervently denied the claims made in the recording about the meat that it uses, recalling those remarks inaccurate and patently absurd, claiming that they use 100% real chicken chicken meat that comes from long trusted USDA-approved U.S. suppliers and meets high-quality standards, and asserting that any claims to the contrary are completely false. And with that, adding the person alleged to be speaking on the recording works in IT and has nothing to do with how we make our food. And then, as far as Garza's firing, you had Campbell saying that it can't comment on personal matters, but claimed that he was terminated for good reason. And so, for now, we're going to have to see how the lawsuit plays out, but it's also not the only challenge that the company's facing right now. Because after the news of the lawsuit broke, Florida's Attorney General announced that the state's Consumer Protection Division would be launching an investigation into Campbell's. And that because, Florida has a ban on lab-grown meat. And so this is going to be an interesting one to watch for a few different reasons. And then we're going to dive into even more in just a minute, but first let me say, we got to be honest. Most shoes, they can't handle a spilled drink, let alone actual winter weather. But the Vessi Stormburst? Different story. Right, Vessi, today's sponsor, makes sneakers that don't immediately fold.
Eating any Campbell Soup, period. All you got to do is act like you're doing something wrong, and I'm out of there. I'm not eating any Campbell Soup. In fact, I ain't eating no soup to come from a can, period. Just letting you know, that's all.
Contractors could track down undocumented people, so their agents can then just stormburst in the coastal jacket before they sell out. But then, next up in the news, we've got to talk about how ICE now wants to offer an almost unlimited amount of money to contractors to track down undocumented people, so their agents can then just swoop in to arrest them. And one of the interesting things is that this plan is actually a revision of a version that had a much more limited scope, because the previous version had a total cap of $180 million that the agency could pay out to these de facto bounty hunters. So we're talking about $180 million total, certainly a sizable amount of money and a massive program, but nothing compared to this new plan, right? Because ICE now wants to set a $200 million cap per contractor, which heavily expands the scope of the proposal. And in general, you see the firms behind this will actually be private surveillance companies who will rely on data that's actually given to them from ICE. Now, initially, the plan was to allow them to have access to ICE databases that have mountains of information on 2.5 allegedly illegal aliens. But apparently, there were very serious concerns about giving private companies that much access. So apparently, ICE is going to package up that information and hand companies little dossiers on targets. ICE also wants to give these private surveillance companies a big incentive to actually take on the work, and they're offering minimum contracts of $7.5 million. Right, all of this suggests that, ICE isn't wanting this to be an experiment, but rather the start of a new expansive surveillance system that should be taken seriously. And a big important thing is this is just one of a few ideas that ICE has to bring in private companies to help with its mission. Over in Texas, for example, they're experimenting with private armed companies to transport detainees 24/7. They're also looking for companies that can staff a program to monitor social media sites like X, TikTok, you name it, 24/7. Finally, ICE is trying to get a vendor to take over a call center that reportedly gets 7,000 calls and tips a day. And all in all, you're seeing that ICE is taking its mandate from Trump to hit 1 million deportations a year extremely seriously. So much so that they're not really focusing on criminal deportations, which is something that past administrations have done. Instead, they're just going after anyone here illegally, with non-criminal deportations skyrocketing a shocking 2,000%, and they're now the biggest category of people that ICE detains. And actually, in total, DHS claimed back in October that more than 500,000 people were deported. So, one, we're going to have to see what happens, but also two, however bad you think ICE is right now, imagine what the enforcement's going to look like moving forward with this. But then next up in the news, we've got to talk about America First pricing. Because national parks now have this new America First pricing that means that foreign tourists will have to pay many times the price of U.S. residents to visit some of the country's most popular destinations. Because, currently, visitors to around 100 national parks, no matter their nationality, they pay fees ranging from $10 per person to $35 per vehicle. But starting January 1st, they'll have to pay $100 per person to enter 11 of the most visited national parks. And the annual pass, that's going from $80 to $250 for people from other countries. And as far as why, you had Interior Secretary Doug Burgum saying, President Trump's leadership always puts American families first. Now with that, I do want to say it's certainly not unheard of for a country to charge higher fees to foreigners for its top tourist attractions. And you actually have some saying that this new plan could bring in hundreds of millions of dollars for repairing crumbling roads and buildings at parks across the country. But then you also have others arguing that people on a tight budget might reconsider their trip altogether because of this, something that could potentially exacerbate what's already a decline in foreign tourism, at least partly driven by the administration's other policies, including tariffs and immigration. Also, I'll say there is a question of how this is actually going to be implemented. And so, for example, you had one former NPS official arguing this whole business of determining who's a citizen at park entrance gates opens up a whole can of worms that isn't fair for rangers. And then beyond that, you have some doubting how serious this administration is about actually improving the national park experience, given how things have gone so far. Right? The agency's been operating without a permanent head during Trump's second term, and it's also lost nearly a quarter of its workforce since he took office. And all of that has reportedly led to routine tasks like cleaning and stocking the bathrooms just not being done. And you also have fewer park rangers giving tours and lectures, and some visitor centers have had to cut their hours. But for now, we'll have to wait to see how this actually plays out once it's implemented. And, if you live in the U.S., but especially if you don't and you were thinking about visiting, I'd especially love to know your thoughts here. But then, next up in the news, we've got to talk about how Indiana could be the next state to redraw its congressional maps to favor Republicans after a top Republican leader did a complete 180 and caved to Trump's demands. Because, as we've talked about before, late last month, Indiana's Republican governor, Mike Braun, announced that he was kicking off a special session in December to redraw the state map after continuous pressure from Trump. Now, with that, it was unclear whether the Republicans would try to gain one or both of the 2 congressional seats in the state that still remain blue. But then, a few weeks later, President Pro Tem of the Indiana Senate, Roderick Bray, rejected the push, saying that there just weren't enough votes for it to pass, and as a result, he wouldn't be convening the upper chamber to work on the matter. Right, and just a few days after that, a majority of state senators appeared to back that decision, voting to reconvene in January and effectively shutting down the possibility of this December redistricting session. But now, less than 2 weeks later, you have Bray reversing course entirely. We're saying yesterday that the Senate would meet on December 8th and, quote, make a final decision that week on any redistricting proposal sent from the House, and adding the issue of redrawing Indiana's congressional maps mid-cycle has received a lot of attention and is causing strife here in our state. Now, notably here, and probably regarding the strife comment, this announcement comes right after Trump dramatically increased the pressure on Indiana Republicans, making multiple posts on Truth Social slamming Republican leaders. Right, Trump calling Bray a rhino, saying that he was weak and pathetic, and threatening to back primary challengers to any Republicans who didn't obey his orders. Trump also implied that Braun wasn't doing enough to get the votes, while also claiming that he himself was the only reason the governor won his election. Now, Braun, for his part, responded by echoing Trump's calls, demanding that lawmakers get in line with their big daddy, and threatened that he too would back primary challengers for those who didn't. Right, and this, even as the governor said that numerous Republican lawmakers, including himself, had been the target of swatting attempts, bomb threats, intimidation tactics, and other threats of violence over this heavily politicized gerrymandering battle. But, here we are today, and apparently strong-arming, bullying, and inciting political violence are effective tools in whatever fucking hellscape iteration of America this is. Now, with all this said, Bray's reversal, it does not necessarily mean that he magically has the votes to pass the new congressional maps. It just at least means that the Senate is going to try. And this is, as far as the State House, the Republican speaker who has previously supported redistricting announced yesterday that his chamber will meet this coming Monday. So, potentially very, very big news as we get closer day by day to the midterms. And then there's more we're going to dive into in a minute, but first let me say, here's some free advice for you. When traveling abroad, spend your money on the trip, not your phone bill. And it's easy to do when use today's sponsor, Saley, the modern way to stay connected abroad without held. All scan if you is last case a pure elected official who ran as both a Democrat and that's when Pete Skandalakis, who's the director of the nonpartisan agency Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia, appointed himself to run the case. And in a statement, he said, as a former elected official who ran as both a Democrat and a Republican and now is the executive director of a nonpartisan agency, this decision is not guided by a desire to advance an agenda, but is based on my beliefs and understanding of the law. And then with that, you had President Trump's attorney on the case praising the move, saying, the political persecution of President Trump by disqualified DA Fannie Willis is finally over, saying this case should have never been brought. And just as I was recording today's show, Trump put out his own statement. It's massive, and the short version is that he insults Democrats for this witch hunt. He even goes as far as to say the deranged Democrats did all they could to viciously attack me, my supporters, and our MAGA movement for telling the truth. The 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and they committed crime after crime as they weaponize our law enforcement and justice system against honest and loving Americans. But also, you have many saying that claiming that it shouldn't have been brought is probably going too far, because the prosecution did manage to secure some convictions against 4 out of the 18 co-conspirators who pleaded guilty. And you even have legal experts a bit shocked about Skandalakis' reasoning for dropping the case, saying it seemed to give a lot of leeway to the president and take his version of events at face value, despite at least some evidence to the contrary. Things like urging Raffensperger to find more votes. But even with that, they're not surprised that the massive racketeering case was dropped, because that's already a hard charge to prove, and it was made even harder after the judge tossed out several charges last year. There was also, I'll say, the practicality of it, with one professor at Georgia State College of Law pointing out that Skandalakis probably just didn't have the budget and man hours to actually go through with the case. All in all, I think anyone that's been kind of watching Trump over the past 10 years, this is the most shocking, not shocking news. And if anything, since he became president again, it felt like this was kind of just going to be an eventuality. And of course, that's regardless of if it should have been. But then as we wind down today's show, let's end on a very, very different note. Because this morning in this divorced dad-looking ass room, I shot another episode of my podcast with Alex Perlman, Crashing Out. And we crashed out on a number of things, and you can watch the full thing with the link down below. At least for the Philip DeFranco show, wanted to share one of the weirdest and maybe important, but also ridiculous segments. And it has to do with everyone's favorite HHS secretary.
Ryan has released behind a paywall on his Substack, a part 2. In part 1, he detailed about how Olivia Nuzzi had an affair with Mark Sanford, who was then another presidential contender in 2020. And then in part 2, he began to talk about her affair with RFK Jr., including the fact that he found a note. And on this note, there was a poem, according to Olivia, he writes, through this time from the candidate to her. And this is what the candidate wrote to her. I will do as best I can an impersonation. To anyone who is in their car listening to this on Bluetooth with family while driving to Thanksgiving, my apologies.
Your open mouth awaiting my harvest. Drink from me, love. I mean to squeeze your cheeks to force open your mouth. I'll hold your nose as you look up to me to encourage you to swallow. Don't spill a drop. I am a river. You are my canyon. I mean to flow through you. I mean subdue and tame you, my love.
He then said, Ryan Lizard then wrote, thanks to Bobby, I am now aware of something called felching. Have fun. Yeah.
Anyway.
It doesn't pay it well anymore.
Hey, is that poem coming from someone else? Beautiful?
It was, I mean, I'm stuck on the line. I am a river, you are my canyon. I will say, like, there's
lots of good bits. Your open mouth awaiting my harvest is one of the fucking most wild lines I've ever heard.
Fall for me. He ruined fall.
Then, my friends, it brings us to the end of this video, but you've got more just a click away. Or you can and definitely should check out the full new Crashing Out episode. I've got you covered here or in the links below. And or if you have missed it, you've got last night's Philip DeFranco show right here. But hey, no matter what you do, let me just say thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here on Monday because I'm going to be off for Thanksgiving. So I also hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving and a fantastic weekend.
Yesterday was Thanksgiving, and you most definitely know that I had a great Thanksgiving. Thank everybody who said happy Thanksgiving to me and all that stuff. As far as Trump concerned, is Trump going crazy or is he getting senile? I don't know, because I don't talk to him and get into his stuff too deep. But I'm gonna get on up out of here. Hey, y'all, take it light, take it slow. Tell him Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.